Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President,
All right, members, for our invocation today, we have no stranger whatsoever. Our wonderful chaplain and senator from District 6 will be giving the invocation this morning. So, members, please rise for this morning's invocation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Shall we pray? Dear Father in God, first I want to thank you for your goodness and grace that you give to us each and every day. You are a good and a merciful God. Your wisdom and your guidance is what we need from you. And if you grant us this, we know that we can do your will. So please, bless our nation and bless that phone. And bless our state as we celebrate this holiday season. Protect us and keep us safe in the days to come. Bless this Senate family and their families at this time. And may the God of peace be with us all. Faith, hope, and charity. These three, but the greatest of these is charity. Amen.
Amen. Well said, sir. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the minority leader.
Yes, if we could please journalize that fine prayer.
Absolutely. Always appreciate the thoughtful and thought-provoking words of a friend from the senator from District 6. Without objection, we'll certainly journalize this morning's invocation. All right. Has everyone recorded their presence? It appears so. The clerk will take the call. With 46 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is now in session. All right, we've got a busy day today. We've got a lot of work to do. We may have some visitors join us at some point, some students from the 46th district. I was able to catch them on the steps this morning. They are student government members of the Commodore John Rogers, and so when they get here, we'll make sure to pause. They want to see democracy in action, and so we'll have a brief interruption at that period. Chair recognizes the senator from the 45th district.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are we doing announcements?
Yes, Senator may proceed.
I'd just like to acknowledge for the first time in the Senate body our new Baltimore City delegation leader in reference to running the show, Ufoma Agarin.
Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Chair recognizes President Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, for the first time in the Senate of Maryland, up in the balcony behind the President is a new staff in my office, Karen White, who will be observing her first legislative session. So welcome, Karen.
Wonderful. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, Ms. White. Any other announcements, introductions? No? Are we ready to get to work? All right, it appears so. So we will waive the reading from the prior legislative day, and let's take up today. We have one last override, I believe. So we have a message to the Senate from the House. The clerk will read the message.
ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 836. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order of Sylvia Sigurd, Chief Clerk.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. The clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 836, Delegate Pena Milnek, COVID-19 Testing, Contract Tracing, and Vaccination Act of 2021. Shall the bill pass notwithstanding the objections of the Chief Executive?
All right, Senators, this is House Bill 836. This is a cross-file of one that we've done before. The question before the body is, shall the bill pass notwithstanding the objections of the Chief Executive? A green vote will be to override the governor's veto. A red vote would be to sustain. Any discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote. If not, the clerk will take the call. With 32 votes in the affirmative, the governor's veto is overridden. The clerk will read the message.
By the Majority Leader, ladies and gentlemen of the House of Delegates, the Senate of Maryland has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 836. Said bill is returned to the House herewith, having been enacted under Article 2, Section 17 of the Constitution of Maryland by order Nicole M. Alexander, Secretary of the Senate.
Message having been read is adopted. All right, we have some committee reports, which we were able to move along this morning. Appreciate the Secretary of the Senate's office for sticking it out here with myself, the Majority Leader, and the Senator from District 1, who was an excellent stand-in last night. Did his job exceedingly well, Mr. Minority Leader, so know that we are in good hands. We're in good hands. All right, we've got a report of the Committee on Reapportionment and Redistricting. 3 bills on this calendar. Clerk will read the first bill.
House Bill 1, the Speaker, Congressional Districting Plan, favorable. This is an emergency bill.
All right. Question is on the adoption of the favorable committee report. Chair recognizes the committee chair and the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. House Bill 1 is a bill that fulfills the General Assembly's decennial responsibility to pass a congressional map after receiving new census data. The Committee on Reapportionment and Redistricting moved favorably on the bill this morning. The congressional map proposed in the bill has cleaner and significantly more compact districts than the current map. It demonstrates a commitment to the Federal Voting Rights Act by ensuring that minority voters retain their ability to elect their preferred candidates, and it ensures continuity of representation by keeping a majority of Marylanders in their current districts. It also reduces the number of districts in Anne Arundel and Baltimore counties from 4 to 3 congressional districts. I move adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Question is on the report. Chair recognizes the Senator from District 33.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have some comments about the bill, if I may.
On the report or the bill, it's underlying bill.
The underlying bill.
We can take it up now. Senator may proceed.
Thank you very much. So I have been designated by my peers as the chairman of the Redistricting Caucus Committee, so I'll be speaking a fair amount this morning. But my peers on this side of the aisle have an awful lot to share with you about our concerns about the bill. So whenever I go to statistics, most of you know I'm a big data man, I like numbers. 65% of the affiliated voters are Democrats in our state. We know that. About 35% of the registered voters are Republicans. So a 2-to-1 majority, in fact, reflects our makeup pretty well, but the piece we miss are all those independents, and the independent numbers are growing faster and faster. As a matter of fact, when you take a look at the total number of eligible voters, only 55% are Democrats. They received, with 7 congressmen on the Democratic side and 1 on the Republican side, they make up 87% of our representation in Congress. And it's my opinion that this map as presented is designed to make it 8-0. So there is no representation for the other 45%. And again, it's an assumption, Mr. President, that many of the independent, non-affiliated voters vote conservative or Republican because in the past 20 years, we've had 12 years of Republican governors. You know, if there wasn't a more of an accurate balance, that fact wouldn't have occurred. We've been very fortunate, and it's been demonstrated time and time again that this body is a collegial body. We get along pretty well. We've just gone through, 20 bills where the governor's veto was overridden. But at the end of the day, we rub shoulders and we communicate and we do a good job of collegiality in the halls and on the bills that have to do with good government. This type of a bill and the division that is being occurred, it is an essence of division. It's an essence of them versus us. There's no sense of collaboration or cooperation in this particular bill, and that concerns me. because I think our collegiality is important. We do set a wonderful standard for the United States. When somebody says to me, oh, you're an elected official, it must be terrible. And I said, no, it's great. We do good things together. We make progress together. But this bill highlights the fact that fundamentally there's a huge difference. We had an interesting bill proposed by my friend from Montgomery County a few years ago about a collaboration of states. If a certain number of states agreed to citizens redistricting, Maryland would come along. Well, I have to tell you, Mr. President, I look at Maryland as a leader in many ways. The issues that are decided in this body oftentimes are setting the national trend or the leading edge of a national trend. And it would have been my hope that the Citizens Redistricting Commission report would have been accepted because it truly reflects a nonpartisan approach. I have the fortunate happenstance to live in a little town, not even a town, it's an unincorporated part of Anne Arundel County. We call it the town of Crofton. And at one point, we had a resident congressman in Crofton, a fellow a little bit taller than me, Congressman McMillan, 6'11". And from 1987 to 1993, Crofton's district, or McMillan's district, turned and faced south into Prince George's County. And Tom McMillan won by significant numbers over and over again. He was a third-term congressman. But at some point, he disappointed the governor at the time, so they took Crofton and they pointed it across the Bay Bridge onto the Eastern Shore. And it was a way for the governor to eliminate who I thought was a pretty decent congressman. It was done as a gerrymandered attempt to remove someone from office. And that was 20 years ago. 30 years ago. And now we're in the exact same position where this map takes the Eastern Shore and points it into Anne Arundel County. And it is my opinion for the sole purpose of removing the sole remaining Republican congressman. And I find that problematic. In many occasions, including today at our committee hearing, Mr. Arlo mentioned that they moved only as many people as necessary. And I have to share with you, I find that a contradictory comment. When you pick up 200,000 people in Anne Arundel County in order to tip the balance of power in that district, I don't consider that as only as many people as necessary. Only as many people as necessary to accomplish the goal. But I think that was a mistake. I'm very glad to see the announcement that the Anne Arundel County will not have 4 congressional representatives. As I think I have shared with you, with 4 congressional representatives in one county, we have more congressmen than 17 states. Now we're going to have 3 congressmen, and we'll only have as more representation than 10 states in our one county. Keeping people in their districts was an important part of the overview of how this map was accomplished. But Mr. President, we know that the district gerrymandering 10 years ago was criticized as Maryland being one of the worst gerrymandered states in the nation. By keeping as many people as possible in the same districts, we're perpetuating that same uneven gerrymandering. I just wish the Supreme Court had made a better decision a couple years ago, but it is the law of the land. Political redistricting is allowed, and it's going to happen. We know that. I read the book, I know how it ends, but at the same time, it's important to remind us as a body of the importance of what we are doing in the process. I truly appreciate all the effort the members of that traveling listening show took place. I was part of 3 of those and Zoomed on one of them. I think it was important for people to see us. Very disappointed in some of the turnout. At Morgan, I don't think we had but 2 or 3 people testifying, but we were there, we were open, we were listening. I think that was important. Those close my early comments, Mr. President. I would like to request the time be yielded to my good friend from Baltimore County.
Sure. Question, it remains on the favorable committee report. On the report, Chair recognizes Senator from Baltimore-Harford County.
Thank you, Mr. President. If it's okay, I'm going to continue on the bill that we have, because I think this is pretty much the number one issue we're down here for, is this congressional redistricting. And you know, we do it every 10 years, and about this time, the word gets thrown around, gerrymander. It is thrown around like candy on a Halloween parade. You know, the governor's map's gerrymandered, the legislative map's gerrymandered, but you know, I always say, well, what is gerrymander? So I did a little research, and I went to Webster's dictionary and looked it up, and according to Webster's dictionary, definition of gerrymander is to divide or arrange into election districts in a way that gives one political party an unfair advantage. And it goes on to say, how do they do it? And there's actually four ways they do it. And they have terms. One is cracking, which involves spreading voters of a political type among many districts in order to deny them a sufficiently large voting block in any particular district. The other is packing, which is concentrating many voters of one type into a single electoral district to reduce their influence in other districts. Then you have, they call it hijacking. This redraws two districts in such a way as to force two incumbents to run against each other in one district, ensuring that one of them will be eliminated. And the last thing they categorize is kidnapping. This moves an incumbent's home address into another district so that re-election can become more difficult when the incumbent no longer resides in the district or possibly faces re-election from a new district with a new voter base. So that's what gerrymandering is. And we can argue, hey, what do these maps look like? Have they done it? And I thought, you know, when did this start? So I did a little more research, dug deeper. Does anybody know where gerrymandering comes from? All right, well, in case you don't, I'll tell you. The term gerrymandering is named after an American politician, Eldridge Gerry, who actually went on to become Vice President of the United States. But before that, he was the governor of Massachusetts, and in 1812, he signed a bill that created a partisan district in the Boston area that was compared to the shape of a mythological salamander. The term has negative connotations, and gerrymandering is almost considered a corruption of the democratic process. The resulting district is known as a gerrymander. So, you know, I got a map of Massachusetts here. This was actually where he did it. It was more up towards Gloucester. And this is what the district actually looked like, this mythological salamander. It ran in the Salem Gazette in 1812 is when they did this. This was 2 years prior to Francis Scott Key sitting in the Baltimore Harbor penning the Star-Spangled Banner. So we've been dealing with this for almost 200 years. And you know what? Both sides do it. States are run by Republicans, no doubt they do theirs. States run by Democrat, they draw their lines to favor them. And it's wrong, but it happens. I know we've had two maps out there. We've got the legislative map, we got the governor's Citizens Commission map, which is more geometrical shapes. But last night I was on my way home. I had to go to work after a session, and after that I went home, was able to get home before the kids went to bed. Tucked Kate into bed, and then I went over to talk to JW how school went. And as I was talking to him, something out of the corner of my eye caught my attention. I looked at it, the synapses in my brain fired and said, that looks like something I've seen. So I went back to my office, looked at our congressional map and said, that looks like something. So I brought a picture, our map.
So Senator, we chatted about this ahead of time.
I'm just going to show you the map.
Fair enough.
It's okay.
So Rule 10 in the rule book is that we do not have props on the Senate floor. This is a map, so we're gonna grant some leeway to allow so that there's a picture so that folks can see.
Okay.
This is a very limited exception.
Limited, okay. Well, I brought a mark, I was going to outline it. But the old District 3, as everybody used to say, looked like, I think it was a pterodactyl. I never saw it. But you know what I did see last night? If you look at District 3 where I live now, here's the head, kind of come down, these little arms, comes down to big legs. I said no, I heard no props, but I brought it anyway. I'll put it down. But
Senator,
T-Rex
come on.
looks like Rexy.
Senator.
Well, I'm sorry. That's what it looks like to me. It looks like a T-Rex. So now we have a district that looks like a T-Rex. The best part, and I don't know who did it in Legislative Services, who did the coloring, but he's got fire breathing out of his mouth. And I think that's District 7. So here we are, we have these maps that, you know, I look down here in southern Maryland. It's a pretty good map. I've got no problem with it, except for why does it reach all the way up in here? I guess that's College Park. I have no idea. You know, District 3 that I live in now goes all the way from the Susquehanna River down to the all the way down into southern Montgomery County. You know, it's not fair to the constituents that have that. It's tough. Because we as elected officials, we know how hard it is. We can put this down. Thank you, sir. We know how hard it is to represent our districts, going from event to event to event. And we have pretty small districts, some of us. Others have pretty large ones where you got an hour-and-a-half drive, 2 hours from one side to the other. It's not fair to the congressional representatives that when they have to go to Eagle Scouts, now I've got a congressman that's going to go all the way from Haverty Grace down to southern Montgomery County, which has got to be at least an hour-and-a-half, 2-hour drive. It's not fair to the constituents. It's not fair to the elected officials trying to represent them. So, Mr. President, I understand that this is the map, this is what it is. I'm disappointed that we took this approach. I wish we could have had more contiguous areas, especially in central Maryland, but, you know, it is what it is. So, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Just very briefly, folks, we are very, very, very pleased. We have some guests in the chamber, in the gallery above, across from the dais. We have students who are 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders from Commodore John Rogers. We have Harrison Brandon, and if you could just stand when your name is called. We have Harrison Brandon, Destiny DeChamps, Anaya Bates, Khalid Smith, and I believe those are the 4 members of the student government. And then we have Kamari Towns, Lola Jones-Carter, Glory Muhammad, and Aylin Cerezo Mendoza, with their teachers, Michael Grizzard and Michael Renard. Please welcome them. I had a chance to talk to them about what they were most excited about seeing beyond Democracy in Action, and it was the tunnels. The tunnels are always the hot item. And so I hope they got a chance to run the tunnels quickly. They did. Looks like thumbs up. Excellent. So we hit the high point. So we welcome you all and hope that you enjoy and stay here today. All right. Let's see. We're on the Favorable Committee report. Let's go to Senator Minority Whip on the report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wonder if the floor leader would be willing to yield for some questions.
It appears so. Floor leader yields. Senator may proceed.
Thank you very much. And to the floor leader, I appreciate having the opportunity to have a little bit of a dialogue before we decide about this favorable report. There's been a lot of reporting in the news about sort of the political ramifications vis-a-vis Republican versus Democrat, who has what congressional seat and all that. But I think it's really important to get back to the process of how a congressional map gets created and maybe what the goals ought to be. In my view, the goal of a congressional map at its base form ought to be having a map that the average person can look at and see where they live and what district they're in. And of course we know in some cases, because it has to be down to the person, you know, there's going to be a few squiggly lines. But generally speaking, we want to try to have it to where a map where people can understand what congressional district they live in, and that communities of interest are kept together, again, as much as possible. So I guess I had several questions, and I'll start with, where did we start? Where did the committee, because the map before us is not the nonpartisan redistricting map, it is the presiding officers in the legislative redistricting committee map. So where did we start on that? How did we start drawing this map?
Okay, good question. We had our nonpartisan legislative DLS staff that worked on, put those maps together.
So they started with a blank map and just started putting lines?
With a computer program that has been used before.
So they started with a blank map, and so it's DLS staff is the one that drew the shape of.
Yes, I mean they knew the numbers. We had to have 771,925 people per district, so that was part of their starting point, and they worked from there with this program.
so they did that and then presented to you all? Or,
Yes.
okay. Interesting, all right. I guess,
Senator, I don't know if it would be helpful if,
Excuse me, not to us. They did the map. That was what has been proposed. They didn't present that to our committee, no.
Senator, I don't know if maybe the President Pro Tem who was on the commission maybe wants to talk some of the
We'll let
commission
someone
process.
from the commission talk.
that's fine, and I may have some additional questions.
certainly,
but that's
certainly.
Fine,
Certainly.
thank you.
Sure, thank you, Mr. President. So, very good question. Basically, the Department of Legislative Services staff, the Legislative Redistricting Advisory Commission, as you know, the bipartisan commission that traveled across the state, we started by using the legal standards that apply for congressional redistricting, which means ensuring that the population in each of the 8 districts is equal, down to the person, if possible. We then made sure that we avoided racial gerrymander in violation of the Equal Protection Clause. We also considered and made sure that we complied with Federal Voting Rights Act regulations. And we also, although not required, took into consideration compactness, contiguousness. We looked at communities of interest, some communities, agriculture, economic interest, social interest, transportation patterns. And also, as our colleagues can share, we listened to witness testimony. And so we started with the basis of the existing map and had consideration for moving as few people from their representation, because testimony told us that most people were in general satisfied with their representation.
So could I continue with a couple of questions, maybe to the current...
Senator, may proceed.
To the senator from British Georgia. Thank you very much, because you brought up a couple of issues I think are good. All those things sound great on the surface, and obviously complying with the law and the Constitution is, of course, the most paramount. But when you talk about communities of interest, how did we get to a place where a district can stretch from the Conowingo Dam all the way to Wheaton in the fashion that the senator from Baltimore County and Harford County pointed out? Or there's several other districts like that too, not just that one, where we've got this. How is that communities of interest? Why would it not have been better to put together sort of a northern and central Baltimore metro area congressional district? Or I'm just picking that out of the air, but why is Western Maryland and Montgomery County sort of spliced together in this fashion? Because that doesn't seem like communities of interest to me, candidly.
Sure, and as I mentioned, all of those factors were considered. So if you separate any one factor, you can come up with a configuration that may make more sense to you, but may make less sense to someone else. And so basically, we used all of those factors, and it's almost like, I don't want to use the word whack-a-mole, but you get the point. When you move for one purpose, it affects the next district. And so basically, communities of interest are often defined by the people who live in them, their travel patterns, their social patterns, and while you can describe scenarios that might look better to you, the map makers don't have the luxury of having a single factor that defines a community of interest. So there are oftentimes different interests that are playing out on these maps.
Okay, so that's a great point, but the nonpartisan map managed to do it. They managed to get a racially balanced map that looks really great, that really doesn't change, frankly, doesn't even really change the political balance much. You could argue maybe one more Republican congressman, maybe not, but it doesn't even really change, it's more of a swing district. It doesn't really change the political dynamic, and you have actually 4 majority-minority districts in the nonpartisan map, and everybody is put together. I mean, why didn't we start, you said people said they didn't want to switch their congressional districts, but obviously we're switching a lot of people still. Why would it not have been better to start and say, let's start with the state, and let's do it like we do state legislative. With state legislative, my understanding is you have to start at the ends of the state and move in. Why was that not done?
We used the legal factors. I can keep restating. We used the factors that we used to come up with the Legislative Redistricting Advisory Commission's maps. The governor's maps, as you've defined, used a different approach. We went in person to communities and heard from citizens, some of whom at different hearings came We had one hearing where a group of people may say one thing, and the next hearing, a group of people may have said the exact opposite thing. So we tried to balance the information that we received using the tools that we have available to come up with a map that met the legal requirements and allowed communities of interest to stay together and be represented by the people that they choose to be their representative.
If I may continue, and I'm happy to go, I think this is it's very informative, if I could continue the line of questioning. So once the draft maps came out, because I believe there were 4, correct? There was 4 at first, and then you've selected one. Did we have public hearings, aside from the bill hearing, did we have public hearings on the draft maps, and how much feedback did we get, did the commission get, or the committee get?
That's a really good question. As a matter of fact, one of the things the Legislative Redistricting Advisory Commission did, we actually waited until we had the actual final census data. We listened and had a series of public hearings in regions across the state, put together 4 draft maps that were released on November 9th, and then we had several in-person public hearings following the release of those maps, as well as a virtual statewide hearing. And then we had a public hearing, I believe it was on Monday, with over 50 people testifying on the final map.
Were any changes made as a result of any of that testimony?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Just one second.
Okay. Oh.
Was there any changes? No, I'm told people wanted changes on all sides, but it would have been difficult to incorporate because any one change could have set some other movements in motion.
Well, that's fine.
Senator, just as a quick clarification, I think there was the maps that went out had to be taken to 0. Is that correct?
Oh, that's right. The map, so we hadn't had the final map that we put on the website hadn't gone down to the actual number, so some puts and takes did have to happen to get us to those exact numbers of 771,000.
And I understand that, but that was not in response to any testimony. That was just to make sure you zeroed out and made sure everything was exactly
right. And we did announce that at the hearing that we would be making those adjustments to get to that exact number.
And that's understandable. I think my struggle here is that you mentioned how you guys waited for the census numbers to come out. And I understand the nonpartisan commission started some discussions before, but then putting out a draft map and then taking input and taking other submissions and then making changes throughout that process, to me seems like a better way to do it than putting a map out, taking testimony, but if it doesn't change anything at all, I don't know what the value of the public testimony is.
Well, again, the LRAP maps were based on public testimony that occurred before the drafts were developed.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. President, I think I'd like to speak for a moment now on the bill so that I have other questions, but maybe as I speak, I can elaborate on the questions in a more of a conversational format. And
on the report, Senator may proceed.
Thank you. And if anybody would like to come up, if anybody thinks that they might want to answer some of what I'm saying, they're welcome to. We understand the larger issue, and we know that the expectation is that we're going to stand here and say this is a bad map that doesn't pass the smell test or the vision test, and I definitely will say that. But I think when you get into the details, and that's what's great about the Senate of Maryland, is that we don't just do the surface stuff, and I mean that sincerely. It's being a part of this body. I've seen time and again on tough issues, we really try to get into the details and get to the bottom of what's the priority and what's most important. And as I look at this, there's a lot of talk about 7-1, 8-0 maps or 6-2 or whatever. I look at it as Maryland is now a majority-minority state. We now have more voting age residents. And actually, we have more residents, period, but also more voting age residents that are a member of a minority group than are white. And one of the great things about our state is its diversity and the fact that we have so many different cultures and traditions that are kind of coming together, much like the United States. So that's great. The last map, the 10-year map we're on now, had only 2 majority-minority